Hello everybody, welcome to the I Am IT Geek YouTube channel. My name is Shabaz and as ever I am the IT Geek. Welcome to, I think I've been miscounting the episodes if I'm honest with you, I think this is episode 6, but because we did an intro video, technically it's episode 7, so it's 6 or 7 anyway. So we've obviously released a number of videos already and obviously been on various topics. This is actually episode 2 within our hybrid identity, the hybrid side of stuff. So we're talking about hybrid identity. We obviously had episode 1 of that sort of little mini 4 episode series where we introduced password hash. Dwayne did that amazing demo of configuring and installing Azure AD Connect. So let's get started with today, and I can tell you what we have in store. So again, we've introduced myself and Dwayne many a time. You know who we are, you know what we're about, hopefully. If you don't, shocking. No, joking. all our socials are in the description below, so do check those out. So yeah, we're still on module 1, but we are towards the last 100 meters, let's say, if we're talking sporting terms. Commonwealth Games are going on at the moment, so little connection there. And this is the Implementing Identities in Azure AD module. So yeah, we're looking at implementing identities in Azure AD still, and as I mentioned, this is going to be part 2 of Implement and Manage Hybrid Identity. So in today's episode, we are going to talk about implementing and managing password hash sync a little bit more, and then we're going to talk about implementing and managing pass-through authentication. Now, we did touch a little bit on password hash sync just because that's the default setting that you get when you install Azure AD Connect. I want to go into a bit more depth around it, okay? And obviously pass-through authentication as well, or PTA. And then I'll be passing over to my good friend Dwayne to do a demo of that. Okay, so let's start off by talking about implementing password hash sync. And as I've done throughout this series, I'm going to go into diagram mode. So let's do a bit of a diagrammatical view of what we're talking about. So here we have on-premises Active Directory. And we obviously have Azure AD in the cloud. And as Dwayne showed us in the demo last episode, we connect and configure Azure AD Connect to implement that sort of password hash sync. Then on bottom here, we have a user. So this user has multiple devices, but and again, there'd be different ways in which you can register that device. It can be domain joined, or it can be Azure AD registered. And then what happens is, with password hash sync, the same password is used to access both cloud services and on-premises services. Okay, so again, what that does is it's less password management for users essentially. So this is the default setting with Azure AD Connect. So just note that, and essentially it allows you to use the same password. Not a very secure password there, by the way. I do not use that password. I do not condone anybody to use those passwords. So please, that was just me being lazy. So let's move on a little bit and talk about some of the elements of password hash sync. Okay, so Azure Active Directory domain services stores those passwords in the form of a hash value. Okay, so we mentioned this I think towards the tail end of the last episode. So a hash value is a result of a one-way mathematical function, so the hashing algorithm as they call it. So there's no method to revert the result of the one-way function to plain text version of password either. So it is a bit more secure. To synchronize your password, Azure AD Connect actually extracts that password hash from your on-premises Active Directory instance. So it extracts just that hash. Those extra security processing is applied to that password hash before it's synchronized. So you know, the whole Azure AD Connect is making sure that when it does that extraction, it's encrypting that hash to make sure that in transit it is protected. And also passwords are synced on a per user basis, so that's very, very important to remember. So the data flow is similar. The data flow for a password sync is similar to the user data sync, in that it's on premises and then it's syncing up to Azure Cloud. However, there are obviously a few differences. Passwords are synchronized more frequently than a standard sort of user account and other sort of Windows user account attributes. And the password hash sync processes every 2 minutes. Okay, so whereas users are normally synced by default every 30 minutes, you can force that, I believe. With the password hashes, it's every 2 minutes. So again, just something to keep in mind there. And obviously, all users are in the scope for the initial sync. So say that you sync it with a specific OU, organization unit within Active Directory. Every user within that OU will be synced, or their password will be synced to Azure AD. Okay, so that's the first time. After that, obviously, any changes you make. Okay, on the initial sync, once the initial synchronization does complete, you can actually set up. Apologies. You can actually set up selective synchronization. So again, just something to note there. Let's move on to some of the benefits of a hash sync. Okay, so because you are synchronizing the Active Directory, you can use the same password for a number of cloud resources, as I showed in the diagram earlier. You can use the same password to access Microsoft 365 resources like Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, Teams, etc. But also to use any applications or resource you might have stored on premises as well. Okay, so it's less password management for users. Obviously, we mentioned about security as well, and productivity is another thing that it improves. So when users are utilizing password hash sync, it allows you to implement things like single sign-on. So you just don't have to spend as much time logging into applications. So that password hash sync does open up a lot more productivity for users. One thing password hash sync does is enable something called leaked credential detection for your hybrid accounts. So Microsoft works alongside a lot of dark web researchers and sort of law enforcement agencies. What they do is they find any publicly available username and password pairs, and if any of these pairs match any of those users, the associated account is kind of moved to what they call high risk. So again, Microsoft are working there to make sure passwords are protected during that migration. Finally, what password hash sync does is it allows you to reduce the number of support tickets, because what you find is people using the same password for different resources in different areas, that they're not forgetting them as much. So again, allowing users to be more productive is reducing that sort of support overhead, because you're not logging as many support tickets. Okay, so now we've touched on password hash sync. I want to move along and now talk about implementing pass-through authentication. And again, I'm going to use a diagram to try and get across what I'm talking about. So here we have our users and their different types of devices. We again have Azure, AD, and all the different sort of applications you might use, be it SaaS applications, Microsoft 365, Exchange Online, etc. And we have on-premises Active Directory. So it's the same sort of format as we had with password hash sync. Okay. Now, with pass-through authentication, the user initially logs in to Azure AD. Okay, so it's not actually logging into Active Directory on premises. And what happens then is it actually connects to an agent. So Azure AD will then connect to a pass-through authentication agent, and then that talks to on-premises Active Directory. Okay, obviously in the background we obviously have that ongoing sync of users, identity, password hashes, and all passwords, etc. So that's a bit of how the actual flow looks. So if we go into a bit more detail with that, so the user, as I mentioned, initially logs in using its UPN. So that's normally their email address. So for me, it'll be shabaz@amitgeek.com. Pass-through authentication takes place via the authentication agent. So that is an agent that's normally installed on an on-premises, or it could be Azure as well, but it's a virtual machine or a Windows-based machine which has the pass-through authentication agent on. Okay, so you install it on that, and that's where the initial authentication takes place. Password validation is then sent to Active Directory domain services via the pass-through authentication. Okay, so that agent actually talks to Active Directory and does that authentication. Okay, or passes that authentication on. So again, let's have a look at some of these benefits of using pass-through authentication. Very good user experience. The user, again, has the same password to sign into both on-premises and cloud applications, spend less time talking to IT to, get the passwords unlocked or they've forgotten them. And also, what pass-through authentication allows you to do is implement something called self-service password reset and password management. So that's something we're going to touch on later on in the course, but it does allow you to utilize that as well. It's a very simple deployment. There's no need for any complex on-premises deployments or configuration. You just need a lightweight agent to be installed on premises, and that's that pass-through authentication agent that we mentioned. And there's no management overhead, so the agent automatically receives improvements and bug fixes, so you don't have to keep on updating it or anything like that. So again, simple deployment and administration, really. Again, highly secure, has a lot of security, so on-premise passwords are never stored in the cloud in any form. Your user accounts are protected, and you can use something like conditional access to do that. And again, we are going to be talking about conditional access soon, so don't worry if you're not sure what that is. The agent as well only makes outbound connections from within your network. So again, there's nothing coming inbound. So therefore, there's no requirement to install that agent in like a perimeter network, say like a DMZ. So again, less overhead and more secure. Final point as well with pass-through authentication is it allows you to have a highly available sort of Azure AD Connect implementation. So you can actually install additional agents on multiple on-premises servers to provide that high availability. So if one of those servers does go down, the agent's not available, you can fail over to another one. And so your sign-in requests aren't affected. Okay. So as well as talking about the benefits, I just want to talk about a couple of key features of pass-through authentication. So the first one is that it does support user sign-ins to all web browsers-based applications and into like Microsoft Office 365 and those client applications. And it uses modern authentications, which is more important. It does not use those legacy, we talk about in Microsoft terms, I suppose, we talk about IMAP, POP3. These are sort of legacy authentication protocols. So it doesn't use any of those. Again, I've mentioned this already. You sign in using your UPN or alternate ID. So this can either be your on-premises default username, which I normally use as your usual principal name, or another attribute configured within Azure AD Connect, known as an alternate ID. Okay, so you can change that if you want, but you normally, in my experience, I don't know about you, but it's normally the UPN that's used, isn't it, to facilitate that sign-in?
Yeah, in most just for simplicity.
Yeah,
use the email address.
So the feature works seamlessly with conditional access and MFA integration. So again, these are a couple of topics we are going to be talking about, but pass-through authentication does work and have that integration with conditional access policies for MFA. It's integrated with a lot of cloud-based self-service password management tools, including SSPR for Azure. And you can also include password write-back as well in that to your on-premises. So rather than, normally if you with Azure AD Connect, or in the early days anyway, you had to, the only way you could update your password was by changing it on premises. But with password write back, you can do it the other way as well. So you can update your password from the cloud and it will write back to your on-premises AD as well. Okay. Something I've already mentioned, another key feature is that high availability, but you have to install multiple agents, but it does allow you to have that peace of mind that if that agent or that server does go down, you do have a backup and you can, your user sign-ins won't be affected. Okay. Final key point I wanted to touch on was this concept of multi-forest support. So multi-forest environments are supported with pass-through authentication. So if there are forest trusts between your AD forest and if a name suffix is routing is configured correctly, you do have that multi-forest support, which is really good. So I've not talked for too long, but I am still tired of talking, Dwayne. So if you don't mind, I'll happily pass on to you to do the demo. Okay.
Sounds good. All right. Hello, everybody. So couple things just to kind of review from the previous video. Wanted to show a couple things here. You can see here now I've got a couple of on-premises sync-enabled users here. One is kind of a synchronization service account. So that is now in here, and that's synchronizing from Azure AD Connect And if I scroll down again as well to this other one, we have a kind of just a default like test user that was in that domain controller that's now synchronized up into our Azure AD. So we can now assign these users licenses and treat them the same as we treat our member users or our guest users within Azure AD. So we've added that other type of user now into our Azure AD environment. A couple other things that popped up after we finished our video on the Azure AD Connect was I got a couple of error messages in my inbox right away after I enabled the Azure AD Connect, and you can see I got an alert about the heartbeat was skipped in the last 120 minutes. I got this immediately after setting up Azure AD Connect. So I got this error. After that, I got another email that was resolved. So we'll talk a little bit more about in the last module of this section. We'll talk about Azure AD Connect health, and this is really the health and heartbeat that is that's checking to make sure that that the synchronization connection remains up and ready. So let's just kind of reviews some things that we didn't get to because we were waiting for the synchronization to complete. But let's go back into the domain controller and kind of adjust this, adjust our configuration. So we're going to go back into Azure AD Connect on our system, and you can see that I now once you open Azure AD Connect, it suspends the synchronization service. But what we want to do is we want to get pass-through authentication connected into here. So if we want to do that, we go back into the configuration. So if you recall, we did the default settings, we did the password hash. So what we need to do is first change the user sign in before we do our our synchronization options or device options. So we're going to change the user to pass-through authentication. So we're using password hash right now. So we can see we got to change the user sign in before we go changing our synchronization options. So we're going to go in here and already logged in, so we can get in here, and here you can see we're back to where we were in the beginning. We did the express settings and we've got password hash. So we're going to do pass-through authentication. Here you can see we've got the option here to enable single sign-on right away with pass-through authentication. So we can use that sign-on experience, and it'll actually bring everything from the cloud to our users. I'm going to unselect this. I don't want to mess with anything on my Azure AD side for logging in, but this will allow us to do our single sign-on. We select next, and it will take us to ready to configure. Checking to make sure I have all the components, and here it is taking into account that I have enabled password write back. It's going to actually install the pass-through agent for us on our domain controller. As Shabaz said in the lecture, we can build some high availability. Excuse me, with vocal cords got a little cramp there. 3, 2, 1. As Shabaz said in the lecture, we can do some high availability with pass-through authentication by putting additional authentication agents on other member servers. So if for some reason our pass-through agent fails, now if we're putting the pass-through agent on the same server as Azure AD Connect, we're giving a single point of failure. So we're not necessarily at high availability here in this particular configuration. We are, we're creating potential issue. So that pass-through agent should probably be on a different member server just for that availability sake, as well as putting a secondary Azure AD Connect server in place. If you've got hopefully synchronized domain controllers as well, have a standby Azure AD Connect setup. Unfortunately, you can't run two simultaneous Azure AD Connect sessions, but we can have that secondary on standby in case your primary fails. So keep that in mind when you're building your enterprise level of hybrid identity. So we're gonna go ahead and select configure, and you can see what's going on here. Here we've got the agent installing and configuring our pass-through authentication. So it's going through all of its checkpoints. This hopefully shouldn't take as long as the initial setup because we've got our database and our SQL Server Express already all set up. So here we're enabling, it's configuring the sign-on, and there we go. Password hash is enabled. In addition to your current sign-on method, we can run custom synchronization as well. So we're not necessarily that password hash is still there in the background. It's still a feature that's kind of just still there in Azure AD Connect, but we are now default in the sign-on method to pass-through authentication. So any users that are on our on-premises Active Directory, even if they are signing into Office 365, so as I said, those users that user one that was on this domain controller synchronized up into our Azure AD, we can now give them a license for Office 365, but they will be required now to sign in with their credentials for on-premises Active Directory to log in. It's not a login for at the Azure AD level. Now, we did enable password write back. So if we want to use self-service password reset with those users, we can do that, and it will write back to the on-premises Active Directory through the pass-through authentication, and everything will stay active for them to log in. Your single source of truth, however, if anything happens in terms of the connection of Azure AD and the pass-through agent, your single source of truth is always going to be your on-premises Active Directory for current passwords, and current UPN is always going to default back to your on-premises Active Directory. So that ends this demo on pass-through authentication. So back to you, Shabaz.
Excellent, thank you, Dwayne. Another really good demo there. So thank you very much. And again, just as we said at the start of the series, we are going to be getting more in depth as the demos get on. So this is a bit more hands-on, hopefully, and you can follow that along. So yeah, that brings an end to this episode. The next episode again is going to be episode 3, as part of the sort of part 3 of the hybrid identities topic. So we do have four episodes for that. So we are halfway through. So again, thank you again for your ongoing support. We do really appreciate it. Stick with us. They're coming thick and fast over the next 3 weeks. We are going to have multiple video releases on specific days. So Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays. This is obviously Friday's release, or half of it. So thank you for your support. Please do keep on liking, sharing, commenting, and don't forget to subscribe. Mine and Dwayne's socials are in the description. A link, more importantly, to Dwayne's book on the SC300 exam prep is also in the description. Buy that, please, and follow that along at the same time as this series. And finally, the GitHub link to the labs as well for you to follow. So thank you again. Thank you, Dwayne. And up until next time, thank you and goodbye.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.